Hey,
Hey, look at you, company man. Got your DC hat. Man,
Oh, I do. I know. Yeah.
you
I
had
love
really
that
pre-
Hall of Justice. Oh, yeah. That's mine from I remember that Christmas. I got that,
Yeah.
and it was like there was nothing better, And
Sure.
my superpowers still my girls like they go crazy for that one, and a lot of my superpower action figures. They think they're awesome.
That's
Nice.
awesome, man.
Nice.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's cool that your girls like it. I like your videos that you post on X.
Yeah. You can see which one of my children are crazy and which one are not.
Yeah.
My
I,
youngest is just like avant-garde, swinging the cameras around.
yeah, yeah. And you're doing your unboxing. I saw
Yeah.
your what was it, your Wham stand today?
Yeah. Super cool. I
Yeah.
I thought just because I go to conventions and a lot of times it's they just stack them up on this wire thing and I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I'd rather that'd be kind of a fun way to stack some of them up and spin them around. So
Well,
like
it's
if I,
all that would also be handy for if there was a Wham stand, can they handle like is it just comics or can they do trades, you think, too?
no, they could totally do trades and even some of my DVDs I thought about putting on there. It's pretty cool. And they're stackable, which I think is even cooler.
Yeah. I can put like what I want to read next on it, I was thinking.
Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a good
Yeah.
idea.
Because otherwise I just have books stacking on top of each other and I have to look at the spine and be like, oh, what
Yeah,
am I reading next?
yeah.
Yeah, take it. Hey, I must tell you, I really, really, really am enjoying your Green Lantern.
Oh, thank you.
That is awesome. I'm like, wow, you nailed Hal Jordan, the voice of Hal Jordan, so perfectly. And I'm not a hardcore Green Lantern fan, but I'm very savvy and I'm a big DC fan.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, like I was addicted to it. I'm reading it on Hoopla, the Hoopla app.
Oh, thank you. The amount of pressure I felt in doing that after the Flash, like it was a lot. It was a
Oh yeah.
lot for me. I like, we've started, right?
We've
Yeah, yeah,
started.
sure.
We've
All right, good.
started.
And then,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
yeah. So when they took me off the Flash, I was really, I was so sad about it. And they give me Flash, or they given me Green Lantern, and I was just like, oh, is that it? Is that my little foray into comic books and no more? And so with Green Lantern, it felt like a lot of pressure because here's something that, at one time especially was the top selling book in all of DC and was such a big part of their line. And to be able to play in it was difficult. And on top of that, I had like Jeff Johns, who I adore, he was cheering me on. I was like, oh gosh, don't cheer me on. Like we need to lower expectations, so it was like, okay, I got to do this thing. And though when I was really reading Green Lantern, it definitely was Jeff's run, and then when Tomasi was on Green Lantern Corps, so I had to, in the intervening years, really catch up to a lot of mythology and continuity and figure out what's going on. And it's a difficult prospect, especially with DC Comics, who oftentimes change their continuity like it's an etch a
Mhm.
sketch. You're like,
Mhm.
I don't know, maybe it's trying to figure it out. At least with the Flash, when I was doing that, they had told me originally everything that had happened, which doesn't really make sense. But then I thought, oh, that's to me the way I'm going to write Wally is he knows about the continuity shifts. He's aware because he's kind of this overpowered being in a way. And so that made sense to me. With Hal, it was like, okay, how do I do all these different aspects of the emotional spectrum and all that stuff? It's a lot. It's a lot of mythology to keep going. So I blow up lanterns and try to ignore it. No, just kidding.
Well, the fact where they said everything counts and everything happened, that's just to
Yeah.
shut up fanboys like me who are all about the continuity. Because
Yeah.
for a period of time over the past few years, it's like, what does this mean? Like,
Yeah.
when does this take place? What
Yeah.
counted? And I mean, I'm a
I'm
big
pretty nuts about it though. I try to make things work.
good.
And one of the reasons I created that character Gold Beetle was always going to be that she would hammer in continuity for me. It's because I'm like, continuity works if you have a time traveler. You can always go back and fix things or change things.
Yeah, if it's not Flash, maybe you can stick Booster Gold in for a couple of issues like Tom
Yeah.
King did and be like, hey,
Yeah,
hey.
I did him. I don't, you haven't read it yet, but there's a backup I did with Kevin McGuire
Hmm.
where Guy Gardner is looking for Lobo and calls Booster Gold, but he's not calling to talk to Booster Gold. He talks to Skeets.
Oh,
And Booster at first was like, I don't want to talk to Guy. But the minute he finds out he's not calling for him, he's just like, what's the deal? Like, because that's kind of Booster's personality.
yeah, that's perfect Booster Gold. That's
Yeah.
perfect Booster Gold. Um, when you took over Green Lantern, was that right after Grant Morrison?
No, Jeff Thorne had done a run,
All right.
about a year run on the comics that focused more on John Stewart. And so it was really cool. It's this kind of like, it feels like Dune almost. It's this very kind of sprawling sci-fi story. And it leaves a lot of interesting loose ends. And so when I had read that, my editor had said, well, just write a sentence that everything went back to normal or something. I'm like, I am a nerd. I cannot do that. I have to explain how things, change or whatever. And so that was a big part of how my run started, was kind of just picking up right where Jeff left off and figuring out how to incorporate that in the next, because I don't know if you're like this, but I am as a fan. If I'm reading a title like I and somebody takes over, I want it to be fairly seamless.
Yeah.
I want it to be, you can fill in the holes like, oh, and then this happened and this whatever, but I don't want it to feel like it's totally different and
Right.
it's outside it, because otherwise, well, you do that on a mini series or a Black Label or a Vertigo or whatever, you do it on a Elseworlds. But if it's that in continuity book, I always feel like you have to address the run that came before in some fashion.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
as a reader, for me, that's what I enjoyed, anyways.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, even if you did like a forward, like one of
Yeah,
those quick forwards that was like this and this happened, and then this and
yeah.
this happened, and bingo, here we are. Shame on your editor for saying the one line because
He was I think he was just trying to help me out, but I like mystery and I like trying to unravel some of it. And I was also, like I said, I'm fairly new to comics. So I'd come off this run of the Flash where I was able to do like 3 or 4 issue story arcs and then like 2 1-offs and then 3 to 4 issues. And Green Lantern was much more serialized. So it was definitely stretching a different muscle for me, which I enjoy. I can see now that I've gotten far enough away, I can see where there are things I wish I would have done faster or maybe spread out. Or, I also, there were 2 events that coincided with my run. So after issue 2, we went into this event called Night Terrors. And, I was told you can write it or not. It's up to you, but otherwise Green Lantern's not going to be happening for 2 months. I was like, well, I'm going to write it. So it was a fun, my 2 particular issues, I thought I wanted to be take place right after my book, or at least issue 2, and be really informative to the character of Hal Jordan, because I still feel like I was getting my sea legs about me on it.
sure.
Um, and I think it turned out really well, especially from what people tell me. They like it. But then we're in absolute power now. So it's interesting trying to take an event and then trying to take your book and try to integrate it into an event, you know, try to make it organic and something that people will enjoy. So people that pick it up. This is another pet peeve of mine when I was reading books. If it was a crossover and it had nothing to do with the book, like it was just the crossover book. And you're like, but what about the story I've been reading? So
Yeah.
trying to balance it so that you have a little of both. Like ideally, you want people to be excited to read it and be excited about absolute power and be like, oh, I want to see what else is going on in this absolute power, but also satisfied because, hey, he didn't rip me off
Mm.
and he kept pushing the story that he's telling forward. or the story that I'm reading forward. And that's always my goal is, I'm always trying to buy back readers. That's what
Well,
I feel.
well, you're doing a good job because I thought the Night Terror one, I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I get it. This ties in. That played off because you set it up where at the end of the second issue, the pilot's like, hey, we're running into something here.
Yeah.
And then you go in the Night Terrors and pay that off, and then it goes back to normal by the end. I thought that
I
was
felt like I got
perfect.
away. I felt like I got away with something on the night terrors too, because what they had told me was like there's this thing and it's going to affect everybody's fear. And I was like, Hal Jordan's not afraid of anything. Like that was my thing. So I was like, I wonder if I can like do a red herring and just the first issue is just, oh yeah, and it, almost tropically, that's not a word, but like at the end there's parallax and you're like, oh yeah. But then immediately the second issue starts with him going like, oh guys, you came to the wrong planet and the wrong dude, and then it's 22 pages of Hal Jordan chasing this guy down, you
Yeah,
know
by the end, the guy's almost running from him.
right. So I don't know how much it helped the overall the overall event, but for me it was able to like show people like this is how I think of Hal Jordan. He's not somebody who runs away. He's also somebody that's without fear, and he's cocky, and but I think he's also this character that I think he has more of a head on his shoulders than maybe he did in the Silver Age or because of all the stuff he's gone through. A little more empathy. As the DC universe turned their eyes toward legacy characters, and you saw, you know, and I was writing Wally, but it was like Wally, Dark Crisis was all about Nightwing and the Titans and all that stuff became Justice League was disbanded. I did an issue with Barry and Hal kind of talking about like, where does that leave us? You know, and I like the idea that they're slightly older in so much, at least maturely wise. Like they're starting to figure things out. And that just fit in with what I was trying to figure out with Carol and Hal, which was definitely an ongoing topic in my own head of will they, won't they, type thing. And trying to figure out if the characters speak to me in a way, they have to convince me that they should be together. Because when I look at it from the outside, I'm like, no.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you the first when you have Hal like see her again and
Yeah.
she's like, oh, I could totally see and the way how do you say the gentleman's name? Ranico, the
Oh,
artist?
yeah. I always say Zermanico, but I could be saying it wrong.
No, that's fine. Zermanico, because I'm like, I don't know how to say this other than this.
Yeah.
So the way he does her body language and her faces with your dialogue, it's perfect. It's like the point comes across perfectly.
I am so lucky that he is on this book. I remember Tim Sheridan is a friend of mine. We were both
Yeah,
doing,
I'm gonna get to that. So
yeah. So
I'd like
Tim
to do
told
this.
me when Jeff asked him to do Alan Scott, he was like, he called me, he was like, I'm so irritated with you. I'm like, why? And he's like, you got Sermanico. And because we had worked with him on Flashpoint Beyond, and he was just like, and I'm just like, I know, it's crazy. So I was every time I just got art back on issue 16, and I was just like, this one in particular, I'm like, this is the greatest issue I've ever written, but that means nothing because the art makes it just, it's so good. And I'm just, I tell him all the time, I'm like, don't leave me. Like, he's too good. Because at the end of the day, like writers get some of the glory. They also get a lot of the criticism in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
But to me, comics have always been a visual medium. If I
Yes.
open up a comic and it doesn't look great, I usually put it down. I
Mm.
don't care
Well
how
written it is.
good
Yeah.
somebody, yeah, tells me the stories. I'll give you an example. This is embarrassing. I've never talked about, but people told me how great Neil Gaiman's Sandman is. The art just didn't do it for me, and
Same here.
I
Yeah.
was like, I can't do it. I
Yep.
can't do it.
I get that.
So yeah, I had to put it down, and it's one of those that I probably should go back and read. But
It's
my
tough.
my point being that like if the art doesn't connect with me, and that's super subjective, but if it doesn't connect, then it's going to be really hard for me to turn the page.
Yeah.
I can usually, as I've gotten older, I can usually massage myself into a story if the art isn't great. However, the this is sacrilege, so I might be in a deeper hole than you. Is I haven't read The Dark Knight Returns because the art is just like so ugly.
What?
Yeah, yeah. The art is so ugly to me. I'm like, oh my
Out.
goodness. Like,
I'm out. No, just
yeah.
kidding.
I
That's
need to
crazy.
email you my geek card, but like
Yeah,
seriously,
yeah. Well, I mean, I said the Neil Gaiman thing. Like, I mean, maybe I didn't even know better. My dad had snuck me Dark Knight Returns when it came out. I probably shouldn't have been reading it at the time.
yeah,
And I think I did think it looked ugly, but I think I understood that it was meant to look ugly in a
yeah,
way,
yeah, yeah.
but it's different because I think by that time I had read Born Again, the
Okay.
Daredevil Born Again series, and I'm such a Mazzucchelli uh not I just got the giant book, the
I
year
want that.
one.
Yeah, I want
But
that.
the Daredevil Born Again series was, I read it and I was just like, this Frank Miller guy is doing something that I don't understand, you know. So
Hmm.
I think I had that in mind when I read Dark Knight Returns because I knew that it would, even if I had trouble, I knew something else was happening too. But to your point, I mean, again, if it doesn't click with you, it doesn't click with you. I remember getting Watchmen and not being like, it wasn't the art. It was just, I was like, I don't know. This is just, oh, everybody's so horrible, you know? And then it's like, I eventually, saw it for what it was. But,
Yeah.
it also depends on what year of your life you interact with these things too, you know?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's true.
Yes. I've seen the Dark Knight Returns animated movie, and I thought
Yeah.
they did a great job.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, Apparently, a lot of people have been like, "Oh, but there's no inner monologue," and apparently that's like a key thing of the story. So that's the only thing that really makes me want to go back and read it is see like, all right, what wasn't put in there in this whole inner monologue where people like geek out over it.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's good. It's
it's
good.
good. Mm.
There's an interesting thing that Frank Miller does where he doesn't, it almost feels like he's deconstructing the character, but he never does. Never breaks the character. The character's always Daredevil. He's always Batman, but he fills the stories with so much hardship and anxiety and grief and darkness and gray around it. You tend to think, oh, look at this edgy version of Batman, say.
Yeah,
But if you pull back and you realize, no, it's just Batman. But at the time, again, Batman was a low selling book.
mhm.
People were thinking this is it for Batman. And then Stephen King does a great forward in one of the Dark Knight Returns books. And then Frank Miller kind of revitalizes it with Dark Knight Returns. And then we're all kind of coasting off those fumes. We're all trying to do the grim dark Batman. I think if they ever let me do a Batman story, there would be a little more lightness to it, just to change it up a little bit.
I would love that. I would absolutely love that. So I'll be looking out for whenever you take over from Philip Kennedy Johnson, Batman and Robin, or
Oh,
Batman from Zdarsky.
I mean, I'm trying to do good work. I want, someday I want that opportunity. That would be great.
Well, I read, like I said, I started reading the Green Lantern on Hoopla, and I immediately was connected with it. Like
Oh, good.
I was like, wow, Jeremy gets this. Like you, dude. I, like I said, I'm not my favorite character is Batman, and I have more Batman books than anything else.
Yeah,
I have Jeff's run, the omnibuses, but I haven't cracked them
yeah.
open yet. And reading your Green Lantern, I'm like, wow, like it pulled me in and I felt the connection. And now I'm desperate to finish reading what is
Nah.
next. Yeah.
Well,
Like
good.
it is that good. It is
Oh,
that good. Like I
thank
am
you.
super impressed. And I had heard about you from Tim because
Yeah,
we had Tim on, friend of the show, Tim Sheridan. And he talked how you and he were from TV and
yeah,
how Dan DiDio, another friend of the show. Love you, Dan DiDio. He brought you both on to DC to do like a writer's room or something for
Yeah, yeah,
5G
yeah,
first, and then that fell through and blah, blah, blah.
yeah. Yeah, it was called 5G, and he had called down to Warner Animation and got a bunch of animation writers because Warner Animation had been known for doing good adaptations of DC books, faithful adaptations and knew the characters. So I don't know that all I've heard a lot of different apocryphal stories about how this happened, but all I know is I was working on Supernatural. I get a call and they say, hey, Dan DiDio wants, a bunch of writers to come over to DC. And I'm like, holy cow, this is it. I've been trying to get into comics forever. This is my chance to go into a room. He explains this thing called 5G. In that room is Tim Sheridan, Josie Campbell, who's doing Shazam right now, Megan Fitzmartin, Tim, and a couple others. And they told us like, okay, pitch some stuff. So we pitched some stuff. I remember them not liking the first couple pitches or whatever. And then Dan was let go from DC. And I thought, oh man, I'm done. I was close. I got close. And Tim had been greenlit on his, which 5G had become Future State, had moved into, they morphed it into Future State. And my name was still on a list. And I think Mike Cotton, who was the editor, who's editor over at Ghost Machine now, I think he was talking to Tim, is like, hey, I've got these people on this list. What do you think of them? And Tim put in a good word for me. So I suddenly got a call to do a backup, and that the backup led to them saying, hey, you have any ideas for the Flash? And I wasn't the first person they went to offer the Flash. And I'm like, I'm a man of a certain age that has been reading comics my entire life. I have ideas for everything. And so they were like, okay, that's better than what we got. So take over. I'm like, amazing.
Yeah,
And
well, how Tim explained it. Tim explained it. He said that you and he wanted to get back into the Flashpoint world. And then Jeff Johns got wind of it. And then next thing you know, you and he are like sitting across from Jeff Johns, like
oh yeah,
paying.
that came later. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Because when Tim was doing Teen Titans Academy, I was doing Flash. And Tim and I pretty much talk every day. And I called him. I don't. We were just talking about something. We always go off on tangents, and we talked about Flashpoint. And well, it involved Flashpoint in a way, and we kind of pitched it. And Mike Cotton's like, "Well, what if we got Jeff involved?" And we're like, "Jeff Johns?" And for a guy who's been reading Jeff Johns books like forever, it was just like, what are you talking about, man? And so yeah, he's interested. So let's meet at the steakhouse. And Tim and I are kind of freaked out because we
Yeah.
don't know. Like anybody at that profile, you hear good things and you hear bad things, and you don't know what it's going to be. And
Mhm.
I end up meeting this guy, and it's like, this is the nicest dude I've ever met. And you're thinking, oh, he's got to be faking it, you know? And then we just worked with him for a long enough time. We're like, he's not faking it. Now you're starting to think the people that told you bad things are terrible people
Yes.
because he's so nice. And it's not just that he's nice. He doesn't need to be doing comic books ever again.
Yeah.
He is, ensconced in television and film, but he loves it so much.
Mm.
And we love it so much. And so it was really fun. And he comes at comic books totally different than I do. He definitely writes comics more like I think Tim writes comics, not like I write comics. I have a we Tim and I totally different ways we approach writing. But
That
it
kind
works
of
all the
that
what?
kind of leads in. The thing that I had been reading was Flashpoint Beyond.
Yeah.
And so I was curious with the three writers, like how did you do that? How with three of you did that project come together?
Well, it was like a television writer's room. We met at Jeff's office and we had big whiteboards,
Okay.
and then we
So
would
this is after the steakhouse?
yeah. And then we would sit down and we'd just kind of come up with ideas, and then we'd break them out into episodes, and then we'd kind of talk about what needs to happen in the episodes and break those down into acts, and just all contribute, and then go, okay, you're writing this one and you're writing this one, and then they would write the first draft and then we'd send it and we'd all kind of give notes and vice versa. So by the end of the day, especially a couple of years later, you're like, I don't know what I did or what they did in any particular issue.
Mhm.
And it was interesting. We were going, I don't know if Tim talked about this, but you can see the covers, some of the covers
Mhm.
of Flashpoint Beyond, the second, especially the second issue.
Mhm.
There's like some covers that you're like, does this have anything to do with this story? And it doesn't. We shifted. We did a total shift where Jeff came in and said, we got to change this. It needs to mean something. And he was really adamant about drilling down into some emotionality of these characters, and it totally shifted the whole vibe of the book and shifted everything we were doing with the book.
Mhm.
And it became a much more personal and darker story with relation to Thomas, but not only Thomas, but Martha and Dexter. And it became
Mhm.
this really kind of quirky, weird thing, And
I think I
and
could see that.
yeah,
I'm like in the book 4 at this point, and hearing you say that, like when I was reading the first one, I'm kind of like, I'm not sure.
yeah,
And then it starts getting dialed in, and now it's like, oh, okay. Now I'm like, all
yeah,
right, yeah. So
yeah.
definitely, you could feel there is a bit of a shift there.
Total shift.
Yeah.
But super fun. And it was also, Jeff plays his cards close to his chest. So it was fun to see him feeding into other things that he was doing in the JSA and Stargirl and the Lost Children. And then he came to Tim and I, and then, and Venditti and said, hey, and his
I
pitch to,
love me. Hold on. I love me some Robert Venditti. Go
of
ahead.
course, I've only met him over Zoom, and I'm like, this guy's the coolest guy ever.
Yeah.
But of course, I've read his stuff for ages, and Jeff's just like, oh, we're gonna do this thing called the New Golden Age, and Jeremy, you've got a daughter, you got to do Jay Garrick, and Tim, you're gonna do this personal Alan Scott story, and Robert's doing the Sandman story, and yeah, and it was like, this is awesome, you know. It's the same thing. Like recently, I was having an email exchange with Mark Wade, and it was like 8-year-old Jeremy is very happy, like very, very happy, It's the stuff that like you dream about and then you get the chance to do. And I feel very lucky and very humbled by it.
Cool.
Man, talking to you and other people we have on, that's like 8, 9 year old Brian is like this, like this.
Yeah, yeah, right, right.
Inside of me. There's sometimes I'll text Scott like late at night, just it'll be like 12, 1 in the morning, and I'll be awake watching some of the people we've talked to. And I'm like, can you believe we talked to this person and
Yeah,
that person? Like, how cool is that?
I
You know?
agree.
So
I listen, when I go to conventions, the only reason I went to conventions is because when Tim and I started in comics, it was COVID. So we didn't really get to meet people. And we'd heard about all these brain trusts and these rooms and stuff, and we never really got to meet anybody. So I got offered to come to these conventions, and it was mostly to meet people.
Mm.
So getting to be friendly with, Pete Tomasi and Yannick and like all these cool artists and writers that I'm Chris Farley in the elevator, from SNL. Like, hey, remember that time you did? Like, especially when I met Kevin McGuire in real life, I was like, hey, and just completely like a puppy off his leash,
oh
just
yeah.
badgering him, like, trying to figure out how we can work together and like convince him that it'll be a great idea and you got to do it. And oh my gosh. So
Well,
it's been fun. It's been really fun. But to meet those heroes and they're people that touched your life in some way,
Yeah.
and to me
isn't
that's
that
huge.
beautiful? Touched your life in some way. You're 100% right, man. You're 100%
Yeah,
right. I
i I
Go ahead.
think if all I do, I think about this a lot because this is what it was for me. A lot of comics and animation and movies and stuff, like that's why I always probably like I was jokingly at Warner Brothers Animation, I never met Mark Hamill. And everybody has met Mark Hamill. And they'd always say, oh, you know what? You haven't met Mark? And I'm like, shut up, because if Luke Skywalker walks in, I'll probably break down in tears.
Yeah.
Because and it's the same thing with like George Lucas or whatever, because I think about how much imagination how much did they facilitate my imagination? How many times was I out there with a flashlight pretending I was Luke Skywalker, or how many times did I have a sheet on my back acting like Batman or Superman? And like so much of my childhood is predicated upon the imagination of others,
Yes.
and that just caused me to have more imagination. So there's this real kind of give back mentality I have where it's like uh I'm just trying to add to the sandbox. At the end of the day, if anybody can take anything or watch anything I've done or read anything I've done and it inspires them to be imaginative, then I've won. I've done something really cool. Um, but then selfishly, I'm just having a blast.
Oh, and that comes across on your on the post you put on X. Like when
Oh,
you're
thanks.
doing your unboxings or when you're talking, the enthusiasm and youthful, just glad to be here comes across. And that was one of the things that drew me to reach out to you also.
Oh,
So,
thank you. Thank you.
oh,
I
thank
try.
you.
I
Thank
can't
you.
really complain.
Yeah.
Like my wife comes home and she talks about how tired she is about having like legitimate work. And I'm like, oh, me too. I just talked about Batman for 3 hours.
Uh,
It's like the stupidest, you know. I mean, not to say there's not hardships. And like I try to explain to people before I got my first credit, I had been out in LA for probably 11 years, suffering through working retail or being an assistant and just grinding it out and
Mm,
watching everybody I came out with go back home or change careers.
mm.
And so there's a lot of sacrifice for some people. Some people walk in and they're gold, but not me. It was definitely like chipping away over and over and over again.
No, it's cool that you were able to get there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's
Uh,
that's great. So you were in retail, chipping away, yada yada yada, and then you like wrote a treatment for something, pitched an episode for Supernatural, or like how did you?
No, I mean, how I got my first job?
Yeah,
yeah.
how'd you
Oh
break
my
into
gosh, this is weirdly
entertainment?
religious, so pardon me.
Hmm.
I was out here for probably 10 or 11 years, and I would meet with these guys, these fellow nerds, once a month to watch Doctor Who. It was Doctor Who
Nerds.
when Chris Eccleston had come, his book or his show had taken over. It was like the reboot of Doctor Who. So we would get together about once a month and watch Doctor Who. And in that group was this guy named Jim Creek. And
Yep,
Jim was like,
super
uh,
nerd.
yeah, I'm a writer. I'm like, sure you are, because he had asked me, what do I want to do? I was like, oh, I want to be a writer. Anyways, long story short, we'd meet over, I think it was probably a year or something. And one Sunday, my wife and I were leaving church, and there was a whole sermon about Moses and the burning bush. And I looked at her, we weren't even married. I said, that's what I need. I need a burning bush. I need something to tell me specifically what to do, like exactly the steps to take, because I don't know what to do anymore. I've been out here for a decade, and it just felt like a lot of almosts.
Mhm.
And my wife said, you should pray about it. It's like, oh, yeah, I should pray about it, whatever. But I did. And the next day I get a call from Jim. Swear to you, Jim goes, I know this is weird, but I was praying last night and I felt like God wants me to be your mentor and I want to
Wow.
put you on my show, but I need you to do this, this, and this. And he gave me like 3 tasks to do. And I'm just on the phone gobsmacked, like, what? And I found out years later, he asked me to do those tasks because he just wanted to see if I would do them, like to see if I was serious.
Mm.
I've used that a lot of times. People come to me for advice or help, and I will have tasks for them to do. And it's mostly to say, are you willing to do these? And they were like, and he told me, I didn't expect you to learn anything from this. I just wanted to see if you'd do it.
Yeah.
And so took an extension course at UCLA and I wrote some stuff. And then Jim gave me an episode of Green Lantern, the animated series. And that was my first credit. And after that, he gave me a second one and then nothing. There was nothing to be had.
What year
And
would that have been about?
that was, let's see, my daughter's 11, so 11 years ago, about
2013.
2013, 2012, 2013.
Gotcha.
Working.
It doesn't feel like the Green Lantern show's been that long. Like
I
it
know,
feels like 5 years ago.
I know. And what was interesting was it takes a while. Like it probably aired like 2012 or 2013, but it takes a while for animation. But I was working as an assistant at a toy company, and I kept like they had all these organic brands. I'd be like, "Oh, you should make a TV show about this." And like, "Who are you, weirdo? You're an assistant." And I'd come up with these like 40-page documents about how they should make cartoons out of things. And they're like, what are you talking about? And
This is not why we're here.
right. And then suddenly Green Lantern came out and they're like, wait a second, you write cartoons? Like, yeah. And they go, well, why aren't you writing on our show? And I go, you have a show? And so they had made a show I didn't know about behind the scenes called Monsuno. And so they stuck me on that show and I wrote a couple episodes, still an assistant, wrote a couple episodes, and then they bumped me up to assistant producer. And I was, they'd send me to Japan. I was like, holy cow, this is amazing. This is the dream. The dream. I went from writing a couple episodes to now I'm an assistant producer. Like, what? And I remember on a Friday, I found out my wife was pregnant with our first child, and that Monday, the entire department was let go. So I was like, oh, that was short-lived. And so for the next 3.5 years, I ended up just being a stay-at-home dad. And I would do ghostwriting and scratch out anything I could do and just not really have any any work. And then Jim got a job at Warner Brothers and he said, hey, we have this show called Justice League Action. I'd love for you to pitch a couple
And he
episodes.
called you out of the blue?
No, we maintain a friendship.
Okay.
I mean, because he had given me the when he was serious about like, I think I need to be your mentor. And the funny thing is that he would take scripts of mine or writing, and he was pretty harsh critiquing them. And I remember at the time having a real like hard time dealing with it, but it was such an amazing lesson
I was gonna
because
say that probably was good in the long run.
oh my gosh, because the amount of criticism you get from people and notes you get, it was good to kind of develop that callus.
Yeah.
And so we did, Justice League Action with the legendary Alan Burnett, and I had done 4 of those, and that's where I met Tim. And at the time, where we just suddenly things started rolling. And I remember I get a call and it was like, hey, Jeremy, there's this Lego DC superhero girls movie that we need. I was going to give it to somebody else. Jim, the way Jim says things is hilarious. I was going to give it to somebody else, but they said they needed it in like a week. And there's only one writer I know that can write that fast. So you got to do it. And I was like, okay. And I wrote it. And that was my intro to Lego. And since then I've done 2 television series, just countless specials and DTVs with Lego. And I developed a really fun relationship with them and done a ton of Lego stuff. But and then I was, doing more at Warner Brothers, and I think I'd done like 10 films with Rick Morales. And and while I was there, they needed a Scooby-Doo. I had done a couple Scooby-Doo things, but they needed a Scooby-Doo, and I kept saying, you guys should do supernatural crossover. And they kept saying, that's the dumbest idea ever. And but one day I was on the phone with Jim and I said, man, seriously, you guys need to do Supernatural. He goes, well, you should talk to your friend over at Supernatural. Maybe we can do it as a show, an episode. And my friend had become a writer on season 4. And by season 13, they had given him the show. He was the showrunner. So I called him up and he was like, that sounds amazing. And none of this ever happens this way. Within a half an hour, we had it all wrapped up. The whole show. It was crazy. It was like at every point, Jim and I kept thinking, they're going to stop us. They are absolutely going to stop us from making this. There's no way they're going to let us do this. And every point was like, oh, this is hilarious. Wow, this is amazing. And it was just like, what is happening right now? And Jim, who never turns down an opportunity, was like, man, I really hope we can go to Vancouver. Like immediately was trying to pitch that we would go to Vancouver for the live action scenes. And we went to Vancouver. And then immediately when we get to Vancouver, he says, man, I hope that we can be in the background somewhere. It's like, and then so at the very end, you can see Jim and I and this other person in the background in the last shot. And it was just like, it was a dream come true. And then they premiered it at the Paley Fest at the Kodak Theater where they do the Academy Awards. And it was overwhelming. And again, that changed the trajectory of my career because they asked me to come work on the show. And then while I was on the show, I got the call about comic books.
Cool.
Wow. So are you still writing TV while writing comics now, or
Yeah, I'm running a show for Lego right now, actually.
okay?
Um, and I have another DTV direct to video DC movie coming out at some point.
I saw the Flash Gordon movie when I was a kid. It's like one
Yeah,
of those relics, like any one of us, you're like, oh, you watch the movie, it's so bad that it's really good, right?
yeah.
So for free comic book day, some friends and I stopped at the comic store here in Albany, New York. And it's called Earthworld Comics, shout out on Central Avenue. And I happened just by chance to pick up your Flash Gordon. I don't know what compelled me to do it, but I picked it up, brought it home, and I read it, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so good! This
Oh,
guy
thanks.
Jeremy Adams is good." And then now you just reminded me. Thank you for reminding me because I was so impressed. I'm like,
Oh,
I want to
thanks.
read this series. Like, I
Oh,
want to
thank
read
you.
this.
Thank you.
No,
Yeah,
thank you.
it's been fun. I mean, I was pitching some creator own to Mad Cave, and they were like, well, maybe, but we also have a bunch of licensed stuff. And then they kind of said something. I was like, I'll do Flash Gordon because I have the same relationship with the property as you do, like the movie. And I really recently, it was Bruce Timm who got me really into like pulp sci-fi, a lot of pulp sci-fi and pulp books. And so I kind of like that era. And so yeah, I kind of jumped at it, and they're like, sure, great, but you'll have to do it for a long time. I'm like, all right. It was just such a like a, you tell me that I got to do this, write a comic for a long time? Sure. Like, what are you talking about? So it's fun. And the interesting thing was the King Features, it would have totally gone in a different direction, honestly, because what had happened was they, I was doing issue one, and then, and then they said, hey, we need to do a free comic book day. And during that time, I got this note that said that they don't really want me using the word Mongo. I was like, why? That's weird.
Like not
Um,
saying football. Yeah,
yeah,
like
exactly. I go, that's the world that they live on. So I was like, fine, I'm gonna blow it up. And they were like, yeah, okay. And I was like, okay. So then it suddenly changed the whole story I wanted to tell. It gave me the grip, and that happens a lot. It's if you have the flexibility to pivot, you can sometimes use it to come up with a better idea than you would have had. And so it turned into this thing where I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna blow up Mongo. And then and then it was like, this is awesome because nobody knows what's going on now. And it's also an easier way. It was just fun. It was really, really fun to do.
you got me. Like you had him play dead and they like put him
Yeah.
on display and the next thing you know he wakes up and then everything else happens. I was like, this is amazing. And I remember I told Scott, I was like, hey, because I told him about some of the wares I got on free comic book day.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dude, this Flash Gordon of all things is really good. I'm like,
Oh,
you should
thanks.
check it out one day. Yeah.
Thanks.
That
I'm a
reminds me to look that up.
I'm a huge Edgar Rice Burroughs fan. So
Oh,
Mhm.
are
like,
you?
yeah, I'm always trying
Okay.
to capture that kind of like adventure-y feel, especially from the John Carter of Mars books.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always like when I read those books, I was like, these are just awesome. And I like that kind of pulpy, fun, exciting.
Well, it kind of makes sense too, because right, I mean that was huge influence on Lucas,
Yeah,
you know, that
yeah,
that kind of stuff, those serials, you know.
I
yeah.
think I think your enthusiasm for everything you write and do comes across. That's why like you don't write a stinker. At least the ones
Well,
I've read, you haven't wrote a stinker.
well, thanks. Thanks.
No,
I also like I think I know where my boundaries lie a little bit.
Mm.
Like I don't know if this makes sense, but it's like I know what I know at some point basically I'm going to try to push myself outside of what I can do just as an artist, right? Like
Mhm.
you want to try something different and it may totally implode. But I also know, like I said, I'm a person of a certain age that's been with these characters for a long time, so I know what I like with those characters.
right.
And I know what I value. And And even like when you talk about Green Lantern, like well, even like we'll say with Wally and the Flash, like that was very, it became very personal. I became very attached to it because I'm a parent to two kids trying to make a go of it. Like it all just was like, oh, this is very natural. This is very slice of life. Like I'm living this existence right now. I love my wife. Everything is what it is. Um, and then with Green Lantern, it was much more of like, I remember a time of my life where I was much more like Hal. But I really was watching, I was thinking about, this is weird, but like I was basing the version of Hal that I was writing off of Kevin Costner and Bull Durham,
Hmm.
like that kind of, arrogant, but also a little, you know, not going anywhere, 13 bucks in his bank account, and but still super charming. And I just kept thinking about that. I kept thinking of Kevin Costner. I was like, he's got this charisma, but at the same time, he's not the most loquacious guy. And I liked it. Anyways.
Wow, you
Nice.
used ensconced and loquacious. I appreciate your use of vocabulary, sir. Well done. Well
You
done.
never
Oh,
know
You
he was
are a
a
writer.
writer, huh?
Yeah,
yeah.
you're a writer.
It's funny because on one of the shows I work on, I get these notes all the time. And this happens in animation a lot. And it'll be like, well, kids may not know what that word means. And I'm like, and? Because when I was a kid, that was one of the greatest benefits about reading comic books. My vocabulary, you know, exponentially increased. And half of it was because, oh, I know what Juggernaut means because I know the character Juggernaut.
Right.
So so it was interesting. It's strange to me now that people value like, no, no, we got to dumb it down. We got to dumb
No,
it
they
down.
could just Google it now. Like I used to ask
Yes,
my parents, "What does this mean?" And
Google it.
Batman
My
says
kids
this.
are like, Alexa, what does
Alexa.
blah blah
There
blah
you
mean?
go. True.
Yeah, yeah.
I had a dictionary and I would when I was reading Claremont's X-Men when I was
Yes.
little, it would be like, oh, I'll look that word up, you know?
Yes,
Yeah.
all the time.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
think it's cool to know new words. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I'm like, that's awesome. I wish I knew that word and I'd use it. And then, sometimes you try to incorporate it in a way that is organic, but I wish people would, you read like 200 years ago when people were writing letters to each other and you read it and you're just like, oh my gosh, it's like Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My dearest
Great.
Jeremy.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh my goodness, this is lost on us.
Yeah.
It's like LOL, and I do it too, emoji LOL.
True.
So I've indulged me about process because you seem
Yeah.
so easy. Like, yeah, write about this, write about that. And you said you thought of Hal Jordan as like Kevin Costner's Bull Durham.
Yeah.
Do you how do you approach each project? Because even just as someone who's obviously like I've been reading comics for 30 years, it's like I still wouldn't know how to approach this. So do you like Hal Jordan, you get like Bull Durham. For Wally, you put yourself there. And then do you do like bullet points of personality pieces like sarcastic, funny, uncomfortable with affection, like things like that, and then keep that as like your key when you're writing a character? Or do you just like how do you do that? How do you and then also the structure, how do you set up a story? Like you're like, all right, this is act one, this is act two, this is act three. Like how do you figure that out?
Um,
If that's
yeah,
yeah.
no, 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 it's a lot. So
Yeah.
with the character piece in particular, once I figure out, it takes me a minute to kind of like figure out their voice. Like Kevin Costner is like a starting point, and then I start writing it, and then you really start to kind of hear their own voices. Like you start to figure out like, oh, no, this character is going to be like this. And it's jokey, but it's like the character starts speaking to you in a way. You're like, oh no, he wouldn't do that. And especially because I'll go back and read a bunch of stuff. So you get an indication of what his personality is.
So you're okay.
So now I know certain, and there's things I want to move forward. Like there's a maturity level and there's different things, introspection that I want him to have, and the way I write and the way that I want to, take his voice in a particular direction. Or also, if I see that Zermanico's art does in such a way that adds something, I will also lean into that. I'm a sucker. Like, oh, you can draw a great crying face, great crying faces all day. But once I have that character, then that that goes away. I mean, it's like I got the character, I don't need to think about it anymore. It's like the character is the character of the character. Like I never, it never it disappears from me. And it's a discordant note when you write something and you write something wrong for Wally, and you're like, well, he's not going to be like that. Like he's not going to say that mean thing. That's weird. And Hal's not gonna be afraid. There's different things you can do. Anyways, but when it comes to the actual stories and stuff, at this point in my life, I probably have more ideas than I could ever get out. And my wife, my wife says that's one of my gifts is ideation. Like I have a ton of ideas, and that doesn't seem to be the problem. The
Mhm.
problem isn't coming up with ideas. Anybody can come up with ideas. I come up with a ton of ideas. The thing for me is like putting them down. I don't do outlines when it comes to comic books, because I feel like I might as well just write it and see what happens. But with regular like movie scripts or animation scripts, I do outlines, obviously. But with comic books, I'm finding it's more about pacing for me. It's more
Mhm.
about pacing. It's more about page turns. It's more about dramatic pauses and and phrases and giving the artist room to showcase a feeling, because the artist to a degree is they're the cinematographer and the actor at the same time. So they have to do a huge amount of legwork. And my job is to help them as much as I can to say, this is the feeling I'm trying to convey, and this is what I'm hoping to accomplish. And I'll call out how many panels there are, but at the end of the day, they're the artists. So if they want to change it up, I'm amenable to that. I want to get them excited about the process. I want to get them excited about what I'm doing. But for the story, um, Woody Allen said, like, never start a script if you don't know the third act. So a lot of these things, I definitely think about how it's going to end. And if I know where it's going to end, then I can start running toward it with a little bit of reckless abandon and tell this story. And with comic books, because they're so, especially Green Lantern, so serialized. And you can see as the book continues, more and more characters start being rolled into it. And we start to figure out what's going on with these other characters and what's going on with the other lanterns, what's going on with space. And so it starts taking up more and more room. And I don't want to give it short shrift. I don't want to cheat it. So it's like, you know, well, we just show him for a second, we never see him again. Like I want to actually have a piece of it. I want Sinestro to be a piece of it. I want Razor to be a piece of it, or Kyle to be a piece of it, or whatever. And so it starts getting bigger and bigger. And if there's one problem I have, it's like I might have decompressed it too much sometimes, and I probably need to tell this story in a shorter uh, expanse. But for me, the storytelling part becomes pretty organic. Like you just start writing. I can push play in my head and go, all right, I'll have general ideas. I'll have like Hal needs to, you know, like I'll say Barry's going to show up in this issue. Um, why would Barry show up? Well, he's a forensic detective, so maybe he could help them with what's going on with Sinestro. Oh, okay. But then they got to go on an adventure because you want to see Barry and Green Lantern do something. So then it starts building itself out, and I start just kind of slotting in big ideas, and I'll write these very broad scripts, and then I'll start winnowing them down. And usually my scripts always are like 10 pages too long, and then I have to squish them down into 22 pages, and then like try to uh economically, you know, put 2 pages into 1 page, or try to give it room. And if I get over 6 panels, I get really itchy because I don't want to make life too hard for an artist. Um, but it's weird because the process of writing is so different all the time. When I said that Jeff and Tim approach projects much different than I do, they definitely come at stuff from an emotional angle. They'll they'll think about the emotion of the project that they're going in, and then from there they'll develop the story. Mine is the opposite. I'll think up the big plot hook, and then I have to go to an emotional story. So the difference would be, maybe they would say, hey, I want to tell a story about a man and wife on the verge of divorce. And my version, it's what if terrorists take over a tower in the middle of Los Angeles and there's a cop that is only there to stop them? It's like both have to end up at the same place. It has to be Die Hard and it's about this thing, but it's also emotionally about these two estranged couple.
Mhm.
So it's a different way of approaching thing, but I do believe everybody has to end at the same spot because if you just have plot without heart, you're not going to care. And if you have heart without a plot, you're not going to care either. You'll be like, I guess,
Yeah.
you know. So I
Makes
think
sense.
I try to keep those in mind. And I also keep in mind the fact that I'm a fan. And I also keep in mind that there are fans out there that want to buy this book. So why give them a reason not to buy it? I want them to be excited about it. So when somebody tells me, that Hal Jordan's half Jewish, and I'm like, I didn't know that.
Yeah, I
You
noticed that. I didn't know he was half Jewish, but I noticed
either.
the yarmulke, right?
Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting piece of color I get to add to his character.
Mhm.
And I think about it in a way that like, oh man, he was also Spectre. He was also the spirit of vengeance for the god of, DC Universe. And like those little pieces, when a fan tells me that like something about Wally or something about another lantern, and I'm like, I didn't know that. And so it's just a huge resource for me. And it's also a way to get people excited because people say, well, what's happening with this character? And I'm like, that character wasn't even on my radar. But suddenly people are talking about it. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe that character needs to show up. And I'm not above it because I think it's awesome. I loved it when a character I love showed up in a book. And as long as it's organically done, I'm not trying to pander for pander's sake. It's more of like, hey, we're all reading this book together in a way. And I
It
want to
fits
make it
the
fun and
story.
exciting for everybody.
Makes sense.
Wow. Thank you for explaining that. I appreciate you going so deep on it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I know, like reading your Green Lantern, I know what I like,
Yeah.
but I'm like, why do I like it? I can't
Right.
I can't explain exactly like, oh, it's because like I can't spot the, like, oh, Jeremy must have been, thinking about this and that, blah, blah, blah. All I know
Right.
is that I like it.
Right.
There's the part, like one of my favorite parts, and I'm just like, oh man, this is awesome compared with and also with Zermanico, the artist,
Yeah.
is when they're on the plane and
Yeah.
she looks in it, and you got the voices so right, because she's like, stop it, Hal. He's like, stop what? She's like, you're doing that charm thing. And he's like,
Yeah.
what thing? Like that. And the way she looks at him and the dialogue and the spaces,
Yeah.
like the dot, dot, dot. I'm like, oh my goodness. I can hear like Nathan Fillion as
Right.
Green Lantern. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm so into it. And I can hear his inflection when he, speaks the words you write for him. I'm
Yeah.
like, man, this is like genius level Green Lantern writing. This is so
Well,
awesome.
thank you. Thank you. I I think about Han Solo and Leia and like that kind of like relationship where it's just like leave me, it's like I shouldn't like this guy,
Yeah.
but I can't stop myself from liking this guy, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And I've
Yeah.
had girlfriends like that where I'm like, I should not like this girl. And what am I going to do?
I've
You
had
know?
wives like that. So it's all good, man. It's so good. Scott knows. Scott knows. So, I mean, like, even when he's like, her, you could see like she's so adamant to push him away that she really does still care.
Yeah.
And then he's, her fiance or
Yeah.
boyfriend gets in the, he uses his lantern like will ring
Yeah.
to box him in.
Yeah.
And
I
then
got flagged. People were like, that's so creepy. And I'm
no, that
like,
was so cool. That was so cool. And then like he like with the throttle, so they got close, and the next thing you know, they're going like that. I'm like, this is so awesome. Like I really your writing was so alive. I was like, this could be a really good TV show.
oh, thank you.
It
Thank
was
you.
so good. It was so good. I'm laying in bed the other night and I'm looking on Hoopla. It's probably like 11:30, 12 at night. And I'm like, all right, let me pull this up. And I couldn't put it down. I
Oh,
was like,
good.
I have to put it down because I had to go to sleep, but I
Yeah.
was really enjoying it.
Oh,
Like
thank you.
I'm yeah, I mean Scott could tell you maybe on like one finger or any other time I mentioned Green Lantern when we've done this show together. And so
Yeah.
for me to go so hard on yours, like I was super impressed. And I was like, I don't know what it is exactly that grabs me, but
Yeah.
this it's making me feel something that is like, I want more. This is so good. So good. I can't wait to go read your Flash run.
Oh, I think you'll like it.
I'm
Did you
sure
read?
I will. I've
Did
I've
you
also
read?
seen positive things about you on
Yeah,
some of the YouTubers. Have been like, man,
yeah.
Jeremy Adams is a good writer, and I'm like, hmm,
That's super kind. I'm a
yeah,
good writer until I'm not, and then suddenly, you're dead to me.
yeah. Hey, I'll DM you and tell you, hey, hey, hey.
Thanks.
You're like,
No, don't do that. No, my
no.
my self-confidence is low enough. I don't need anybody else throwing bricks at me.
Well, I remember Tim told a story. He's like, yeah, I was in. Well, hold on, I have to get it right because he called me a sweet summer child when I got it wrong. He was like, yeah, I was in Coach Plus or Premium Plus, and I made eye contact with Jeff Loeb, who's in first class. And then next thing you know, Jeremy and I are at the Comic Con, and Jeremy's like, "Hey, Jeff, like you guys have known each other forever, and you're all hopped up on Red Bull." And then he's over there like sweating because Jeff Loeb knows that he adapted his Long Halloween. So
Yeah, I tend to get like, especially at conventions, it's like I'm with my tribe. You know what I
yes,
mean? Like
yeah,
I'm having so much fun.
yeah,
And honestly, my mentor, Jim Krieg, he's like this. He lives his life where he's going, I don't want to regret not having that interaction. And so he really puts himself out there. And I think I've learned a lot from that. So I'm very happy to be like, I love that guy. I'm going to go tell him I love him, or I'm going to go say hi to him, or I'm going to go introduce myself. And it becomes a little easier when you have a few credits behind your back.
yeah.
But I would do it before that too. But yeah, and with Jeff Loeb, I'm a huge fan of Jeff Loeb. Like Batman Superman run was real. I really liked his Batman
Love it,
Superman
love
run.
it. I
And
have
then
the
of course
absolute
I
editions.
love Commando. Like
Oh yeah, right.
so
My
so
friend
and I
is
like,
dead tired.
yeah,
Ugh.
yeah, exactly. And then like he did
Uh,
Hush and he's done all these things. So I'm a big fan. But I remember I think it was Jeff Johns was talking about how cool he was or whatever. And I was like, well, any friend of Jeff. And so at a certain point, the funny thing is there are moments where I'm just really extroverted, like, yeah, I'll introduce myself to the Pope. And then there are moments where I'm just like really just freaked out that I'm just like, I just got to go away because I don't know how to talk to anybody. But that was one of those high moments because I had such good interactions with everybody all day and I had so much fun meeting everybody and I was there was nothing. I was bulletproof, I felt like at that time and in my
well
head,
said.
part of it
Well said.
too is that I thought Tim, he was really like sweating this interaction and I just kept thinking like don't sweat it. It's awesome. Like you got to do an adaptation of this guy's amazing work. And I don't, that to me, it's like, we don't have to prove anything to Jeff Loeb. He's done it all. You know what I mean? So, he was very courteous and kind, but it was really funny. And then I also thought, well, this will make Tim a little uncomfortable, and that's
Yes,
okay.
and that's
That's okay
always
with me
fun.
too.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I
yeah,
don't mind making him uncomfortable. He
yeah,
makes me uncomfortable all the time. This
yeah,
is
yeah,
what
yeah,
friends do to each other.
yeah. Oh, well, I appreciate what you said about yourself. I think Scott knows somebody like that as well, right, Scotty?
Yeah.
I just barge over. I'm like, hey, like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. You got to do it. You got
I
to do
met
it.
I met Rob Liefeld like that too
Yeah,
at New York Comic Con.
same, same. That's how I met him
Same,
at
yeah,
San
yeah. Like
Diego. Yeah.
Scott and I were about to leave. We were there on Thursday last year, and I'm like, oh, there's Rob Liefeld. And so Scott and I love his podcast. Have you ever listened to it, Rob Observations?
I listen to it all the time.
Yes, actually, Tim might have told me that you've been trying to get him to listen to it when I
Yes,
mentioned. Okay.
I probably did. I'm like, you need to listen. This is like a master class for
Yes.
Yeah.
acting.
Yeah.
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 Absolutely. Scott and I love it, and so he's when we're about to leave, he's at his table finally. There's a whole line of people, and the first person is probably like 10 feet away from him. Security is like keeping everybody in line, and he's over there getting his things together. So I just happen to like tiptoe over there, and he looks at me, and then he looks away, and he's doing his thing, and then he looks at me because I'm a large human being, and so I go over there, and he's like looking at me and I'm like, hey man, I just want to let you know I love the podcast. And then that just like shattered the ice.
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, thank you so much. And this and that,
Yeah.
mama. And normally he doesn't let people shake his hand, but I put my hand out and he shook my hand because he's like,
Yeah.
thank you so much. Thank you for telling me you love the podcast, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Scott has it on video. We posted it on the channel. It's like a 4
That's
minute
great.
video. Oh, it was awesome. It was so cool.
No, I
But
love
it
his.
was, it was that. It was
Yeah.
like, oh my God, there's Rob Liefeld. I have to go say hi because
Yep.
I don't know if I'll see him again.
Yep. I
Brian
agree.
Brian got him to do his Toddy
Oh
McFarlane
yeah,
thing.
and the Todd impression. I told him thank you for that, Scott. Jeremy, I'm like,
Podfather. Yeah.
Yeah.
dude, I'm telling Rob, I'm like, I love the show. I love your Todd impression. And he goes like right into it like that.
That's
Oh,
funny.
like that.
That's
And I'm
so
going like
funny.
back and forth with him, like, and
That's so
I'm trying
funny.
to do mine. It was hilarious. It was a good time.
He's
So,
great.
oh,
He's great. Yeah.
Toddy.
That's how I did it. I just went up and I was like, I'm like, it's the same thing. I was like, man, I just can't tell you how much enjoy your work and your podcast. And like, I can't like X-Force and New Mutants at the time. Like, I don't know if there was a bigger influence.
Mhm.
And then when the Image guys broke off, it was such a huge thing. Todd McFarlane, all those guys, I was like in awe, bought everything. How many of us probably have multiple Spawn number ones and Youngblood number ones stashed away. But
Um,
I,
okay.
I was just exhilarated to meet him.
Well, speaking of that, there's somebody in this Zoom chat that has a bunch of cable number ones
Oh
because of
yeah.
Rob.
I
Yeah,
do
I
have
mean, right?
Youngblood too.
Yeah. I mean, I have tons of X-Force in the poly bags, and I
Yeah.
thought I was so clever. I took a like an X-Acto knife and cut it open so I could see which card was in, and
Uh,
and then I put it back and like scotch taped it. Like that would make it, no one will know. No one will know.
at least
Yeah,
you didn't try to melt it with a match.
Totally, totally. Yeah.
that's true.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh,
Well, Ram V, we had him on a couple of weeks ago, and he
that
said
guy.
I was telling him how much I love gimmick covers, and he was telling me, "Wait till you see the cover that we do for New Gods." And I'm like, "Okay, I'm looking forward to it."
Oh, that
That
should be
guy's
interesting.
great. He's
Yeah,
so
yeah, I'm
great.
I'm super excited for that one. The last thing we've had you for about an hour and 10
Okay.
minutes now. Last thing is I really enjoy talking to Tim Sheridan, but since he mailed Scott and I some comics too, because he messed up
Oh,
our
that's sweet of him.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's so unusual and sweet of him.
yeah,
Yeah.
because he messed up the date. Like he messed up the time. I put EST, like 7 p.m.
Yeah.
EST, and he thought it was Western.
Yeah.
So he's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll send you guys comics." I'm like, "I will
No.
accept them." So then he jumps off Twitter, and so I haven't been able to reach out to him. Do you mind calling him? Can you call him and be like, "Hey, man"?
I'm not gonna call him.
Okay, I figured I'd throw that out there.
I appreciate it, but like I never know what's gonna cause somebody to go, "What are you doing?" So he would
Yeah.
answer. I'm not worried about
No,
that. But
that's why I asked and be like, "Hey, Brian from Sheehan is dead," and with Scott, and he'd be like, "Oh yeah," he took pictures with us. Plus, I would want to see, if he remembered us. So
I'm sure he does. I'm
I'm
sure he
sure
does.
he does too.
Yeah.
But I would love to get in touch with him. How does one get in touch with him?
He's on Instagram.
I know, but I don't do Instagram. Like
Oh well.
the only social
There you
media I
go,
have is
dude.
X.
Yeah.
Go to Instagram. That's where
I
he
might
is.
I might just
I think
make
he's on
one.
Threads too.
Threads.
Yeah,
Okay.
Threads. He's on
Because
Threads.
I looked for his website, but like there's a few Tim Sheridans that have
No,
stuff
yeah, I
online.
don't I don't know if he has a for sure website, but he's on Threads
Okay.
and I believe he's on Instagram. So those are probably the two best ways.
Okay. Thank you. Because I also sincerely wanted to tell him that I missed him.
Oh, good.
I miss
He
interacting with him.
listen, stroke his ego. He'll love it.
No, that exactly. That's why I was like, let me see if Jeremy. Yeah, okay. So, but thank you. I'll look on Threads as well. So,
Yeah.
but otherwise, yeah. Thank you so much for
Oh,
making
thank you
time.
guys. This is super fun. I appreciate it.
No, you've been a blast, man. You've been a blast. You're not a writer, you're a fan, and your fan
Yeah.
fiction. But your fan fiction is awesome. It doesn't suck.
Thank you. I
So,
appreciate that. And then,
no,
let me know what you think when you get done with the Flash too. I'll be curious.
I I promise I will DM you.
Okay.
And so
You'll be
right
like,
now,
it's too silly. Boom.
whoosh. No, so right now you're working on Green Lantern. Do you know where you're going from that? Do
So
you have anything
indefinitely on Green Lantern, I'm doing Flash Gordon, and then there will be another book that will be announced sometime soonish, maybe.
for DC?
Correct.
Okay. All right. Because I think
Well,
sincerely, you've won me over. I would be happy to read anything that you wrote.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. I
No,
keep trying to get Marvel to bite a little bit too, and I did a couple of digital books for Marvel, but I'd love to get some paper under my feet over there.
hmm.
yes. Oh, well, that reminds me, you mentioned Marvel. So when I had Ron V, he was like, I don't like the question someone will ask me. They'll say, if you could write any character for any company, who would you write? He's like,
Right.
because I can write any character,
Oh, I
you
love
know?
that. Of course, Rom would say that.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. He was like, and I was waiting for him to take one of his lush locks and like push it back
I
like that.
know.
You know what I mean?
Far too handsome, that man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's what he said. How about you yourself? Is there anything that you're like,
So many. I mean, Batman's probably the top of the heap. I've done them in animation and in both movies and Lego and whatever, but I would love to do them in comic books. Captain America is in the mix because the Mark Grunwald run of Captain America was huge for me, and I would like to think I could do Daredevil, but I'm scared to do Daredevil because
mm,
everybody that does Daredevil, it's great.
mm.
You know what I mean?
Well,
It just
you
seems
make
like
sure
it's had a consistent, awesome run of Daredevil just constantly. I would love to do some sort of something in the mutant world. But yeah, Captain America. I love Ted Kord, Blue Beetle, just so much. And I love a lot of Ditko characters too. So I love Doctor Strange and I love Speedball and all these wacky characters. But yeah, I think you like Batman, Captain America. Those
do
are
you
two
do you
of the
have
top.
like a story though for like Captain America and or Batman that's been like
Batman for sure.
swimming in the back of your
Uh,
brain?
yeah, Batman
Okay.
for sure just keeps percolating and like
Okay.
more parts of it keep growing. With Captain America, no, because it just seems so far away as a possibility,
Mhm.
you know. But I what I remember buying Captain America comics when it was Captain America No More, and he had to turn in his costume and shield and
Was that when he became the what was that? The
U.S.
woman?
agent.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
And then John or Walker gets to be Captain America, and there's this whole journey back to being Captain America. I loved it. D-Man, Nomad was running around at that time. I loved all that stuff.
I
That was
remember Nomad. I
yeah.
think I had like the gimmick cover for that back in the early 90s.
Yeah,
It's
I did. I did. I mean,
yeah.
there was no more 90s thing where it's like he's got the trench coat and like the mullet
Didn't he
and
have like sunglasses?
yeah, I was just gonna
Right?
say he has like
Yeah.
the Brian Bosworth,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. The
you know,
boss. Yeah,
and
yeah,
it was
yeah.
like, dude, this guy, is driving around with like a baby, and I loved it. I loved it. I was a
He's
bit
he's
New
on a
Warriors
Harley with
fan.
his coat just
Yeah,
swinging in the winds, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
That New Warriors. There were some just really cool books that I dug. But yeah, Batman. It's not just Batman, but it's like down like Nightwing and Robin and Cassandra Cain Batgirl, and I love all the martial arts. I did a Batman movie with Bruce Timm called Batman Soul of the Dragon, and it's just a martial art movie that just happens to have Batman in it. But it's just because I love DC martial arts a great deal. So
That's awesome. That's so cool. I love how Jay Oliva,
yeah,
what is it, Oliva? Jay Oliva.
Oliva, yeah. He did so much
Oliva.
amazing work out there. Yeah,
Yeah, I watched some of the bonus features, and he's like how he loves like martial arts, and
yeah,
you can see it in the animation. It's beautiful. It's awesome.
yeah.
So well done.
That's good stuff.
Thanks
Well,
for being
thank
with
you
us, dude.
so much for coming
Thank you
on.
guys. I appreciate it.